The Nyirzi sat in their grand council hall, a towering chamber that seemed to stretch into infinity. The room was alive with the soft hum of energy, the air vibrating with the subtle presence of the beings themselves. The Nyirzi were not like any other species in the galaxy. They were ethereal, their bodies composed of translucent skin that shimmered with a faint glow, giving them an almost spectral appearance. They moved gracefully, their limbs long and slender, each motion precise and deliberate. Their eyes, pools of liquid light, observed the universe in a way no human could ever comprehend. To them, time itself was a malleable force, and the intricacies of life were as clear to them as the surface of still water. At the center of this vast hall stood Lillian Kor, her hands shackled to a cold metal chair, her posture rigid, her expression one of defiance. Her skin was bruised from the battle that had led to her capture, but her spirit remained unbroken. She was a human captain, one of the few survivors of the galactic wars, a woman who had fought tooth and nail for every inch of territory, every breath of air. She was not the first to be captured by the Nyirzi, and she certainly would not be the last, but her resilience had earned her a special place in their eyes. It was why she was here, in this moment, about to be sentenced to a fate that no one had yet survived. The High Nyirzi, the leader of their kind, floated to the center of the room. His voice, though not spoken in words, resonated through Lillian's mind, sending ripples of unease through her thoughts. "You are an anomaly," the voice echoed, its tone devoid of emotion. "Your species has defied us for the last time. You have resisted our guidance, our attempts at pacification, and you have shown an unnatural desire to conquer. You have threatened the peace we have cultivated for millennia." Lillian stared at the High Nyirzi, her jaw set in determination. "We fight to survive," she replied, her voice cold but steady. "You may think you're the masters of the galaxy, but we humans fight, because we know that the only way to live is to never surrender." The Nyirzi did not respond immediately. Their gaze, penetrating and distant, seemed to pierce through her, reading not just her thoughts but her very soul. They had already made their decision. It was the only logical course of action. "You have brought this upon yourselves," the High Nyirzi continued. "We have tried to guide your species, to show you the ways of peace, but you have chosen the path of violence, of chaos. You are a cancer, spreading throughout the galaxy, consuming everything in your path. You must be eradicated before you become a greater threat to the harmony of the cosmos." Lillian's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she braced for the next words. "What will you do to us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Exercising. We will exile you," the High Nyirzi said, a thin thread of satisfaction in his voice. "You will be sent to a world where survival is impossible, a place where even the most resilient of species have fallen. You will be abandoned to your fate, left to die on a Deathworld." The words hit Lillian like a physical blow. "Exiled?" she repeated, her voice rising with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You can't do that. You can't just—" "You will be sent to Eztar," the High Nyirzi interrupted, his voice now final. "A planet known for its hostility, where no life can thrive. It will be your tomb. A Deathworld." The term was not unfamiliar to Lillian. She had heard whispers of such places, worlds where life itself was an adversary, a planet so hostile that it killed those unprepared for its fury. But the Nyirzi were wrong to think that she, and by extension humanity, would crumble under such conditions. They underestimated the sheer force of will that defined human beings. The Nyirzi believed that by sending humanity to a planet where survival was nearly impossible, they could extinguish the human spirit once and for all. But Lillian had fought her entire life to survive. She would not bow to the will of these alien beings. "Send us then," Lillian said, her voice filled with an unyielding strength. "We'll show you that we are more than just survivors." And the Nyirzi's gaze softened, but only for a moment. They had anticipated defiance. It was in fact one of the things they had studied most closely about humanity. Their stubborn refusal to submit, even in the face of certain death. They thought they had prepared everything. The world of Eztar would break them. It was only a matter of time. Without another word, the Nyirzi activated the transport sequence. Lillian felt a sudden pressure in the air, followed by an intense sensation of weightlessness. The world around her seemed to stretch and bend, and in an instant, she was gone. When Lillian awoke, the world around her was foreign, alien in every sense of the word. Her body ached from the crash, and she groaned as she tried to lift herself from the ground. The air was thick and dry, the sky above a sickly shade of yellow, and the landscape stretched out in all directions, barren and desolate. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp and jagged like the teeth of some ancient beast. The ground was cracked and parched, and in the distance, she could hear the low rumble of something moving, something big. Lillian took a moment to collect herself. Her hands were bruised, but there was no time to waste. She had to find her team. Her mind raced as she pushed through the pain and forced herself to stand. The transport had scattered the crew of her ship across the surface of the planet, but she had no doubt they were alive. She had faith in them. They would survive. They had to. It wasn't long before Lillian spotted the others. Lieutenant Marcus Hale was the first to reach her, stumbling toward her with a grim look on his face. His uniform was torn, and his hair was matted with dirt, but he was alive. "Captain," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "where are we?" Lillian looked around at the barren landscape. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we're here and we're alive. That's what matters." The rest of the crew appeared one by one, all battered but intact. They quickly gathered around Lillian, their expressions a mix of disbelief and determination. "What do we do now, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Sarai, a young woman whose optimism had always been her greatest strength. "This place, it's nothing like we've seen before." Lillian glanced around, surveying their surroundings. The sky seemed to press down on them, the atmosphere thick and oppressive. The air was dry, making each breath feel like it scraped against her lungs. But she had lived through worse. Much worse. The galactic wars had shown her just how strong the human spirit could be, and she would not let her people be extinguished here. "We survive," Lillian said firmly. "We adapt, we learn, and we fight back." The next few days were a blur of frantic survival. The teams scoured the area, seeking shelter from the harsh elements and the creatures that roamed the land. They encountered things that were beyond anything they had ever imagined. Towering insectoid creatures with venomous stingers, massive quadrupeds that hunted in packs, and plants that seemed to react violently to touch. But through it all, they pushed forward, using their training, their ingenuity, and most importantly, their determination. Despite the dangers, there was something strangely exhilarating about this new world. It was a place where the rules were different, where survival was the ultimate test. Lillian found herself drawn to the challenge. They weren't just fighting to live, they were fighting to thrive. One day, while exploring a cave system deep within the mountains, they made a discovery that would change everything. The walls of the cave were covered in strange symbols, and beneath the surface they uncovered what appeared to be a technology far beyond anything humanity had ever known. It was not like anything the Nyirzi had left behind. This technology was ancient, hidden beneath layers of rock and time. But it was functional, a relic of a civilization long since gone. The metal, when touched, seemed to hum with an energy that was almost alive. As the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the humans of Eztar began to realize that this Deathworld was not just a place of exile. It was a forge, a crucible where the very essence of humanity could be shaped into something new. The energy from the cave systems, the discoveries they made, and the creatures they learned to tame all combined into something extraordinary. The Nyirzi had underestimated humanity. They had thought that by exiling them to a death world, they would destroy them. But instead, they had given humanity the tools to become something even greater. They had created a superpower, one that would not only survive, but thrive. And the Nyirzi, so sure of their victory, would soon learn that their greatest mistake had been thinking they could break the will of humanity. The days blended together in a haze of exhaustion and determination. Time on Eztar did not have the same rhythm as it did on Earth, or aboard the ships they had once called home. Here, every moment was a struggle for survival. The sun, a faint and sickly orb in the sky, offered no warmth. The winds howled with a bone-chilling cold, and the ground beneath them cracked and trembled as though the planet itself was alive, moving with a slow, deliberate fury. And every step they took felt like they were walking through the teeth of a beast. Yet somehow, they kept moving forward. Lillian Kor had always been a leader. She had led her crew through the chaos of war, had navigated the politics of the Galactic Council, and had faced down enemies who had believed themselves invincible. But nothing in her previous life had prepared her for the sheer hostility of Eztar. The creatures here were not just dangerous, they were apex predators, each one more terrifying than the last. The plants could kill with a single touch, their thorns coated with venom so potent it could paralyze a human within seconds. The air itself was thick, almost oppressive, and it felt like it was pressing down on them, challenging them to give up, to stop struggling, to admit defeat. But humans, Lillian had learned, did not know how to give up. They adapted, they fought, they survived. Each day on Eztar brought new discoveries and new dangers. Their first night on the planet, they had made camp beneath the twisted, gnarled branches of massive trees, their surfaces coated in a slick black sap that oozed with an almost malevolent energy. The trees seemed alive, shifting and groaning in the wind, as though they were watching the humans, waiting for them to make a mistake. But in the morning, as the first rays of the sun filtered through the sickly clouds, they had been forced to abandon the trees when they discovered that the sap was highly flammable. One of the crew had accidentally brushed against a branch, and within moments, the air was thick with the smell of burning resin. The next day, Lillian had led them toward a distant mountain range, hoping to find shelter and some form of water. It was there that they had encountered the first of many deadly creatures, a massive reptilian beast with scales that gleamed like polished metal, its eyes a deep glowing red. The creature had been almost invisible against the rocky terrain, its movements so fluid and silent that they had only realized its presence when it was too late. It had leapt from the shadows, its jaws wide, its teeth as long as a human arm. Lillian had barely been able to shout the order to take cover before it had struck, its claws raking across the ground, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The battle had been brutal. The crew fought with everything they had, using whatever weapons and tools they could find. Lillian had taken the lead, coordinating their attacks and using the terrain to their advantage. They managed to bring the creature down, but not without casualties. Sergeant Alvar, a tall man with a deep voice that had always been a source of comfort, had been the first to fall, his body torn apart by the creature's claws. The loss was a blow that left the crew reeling, but Lillian refused to let it break them. She had seen too much death in her lifetime to let it define her now. "We bury him," Lillian had said in the aftermath, her voice steady despite the grief gnawing at her insides. "We bury him, and we keep moving. For Alvar, for all of us." And they did. They buried their fallen comrade beneath the red soil of Eztar, marking his grave with a crude stone that they carved with his name. It was a moment of silence, a rare one in the chaos of their new life. But then they got back to work. The planet was unforgiving, and there was no time for mourning. Weeks turned into months. The crew grew closer as they learned to survive in this hostile environment. They scavenged what they could from the wreckage of their ship, repairing their equipment and crafting new tools. The harshness of the planet forced them to become resourceful. They began to adapt to their new surroundings, learning the behavior of the creatures and plants around them. They discovered that the planet had its own rhythm, its own cycle of life and death. They began to understand the signs, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the movement of the creatures, the change in the winds that indicated when danger was near. Lillian spent most of her time out in the field, scouting new areas, testing the boundaries of their new world. She would often return to camp with fresh information, a new discovery, a new plan. It was during one of these expeditions that she first encountered the strange, glowing metal beneath the surface of the mountains. She had stumbled upon it by accident, her foot slipping as she climbed over a rocky outcropping, her eyes catching the gleam of something metallic beneath the soil. At first, she thought it was just a fragment of some alien technology, perhaps left behind by the ancient civilization that had once inhabited the planet. But as she dug deeper, using a makeshift tool she had crafted from a shard of metal, she realized that this was something different. The metal was not just a simple artifact. It was something alive, something that pulsed with an energy all its own, and was unlike anything she had ever seen before. And its surface seemed to respond to her touch, humming softly, as if welcoming her. Lillian's heart raced as she pulled more of the metal from the ground. She carefully examined it, her mind racing with possibilities. This was more than just a discovery. It was a key to something greater than survival. She knew that if she could unlock its secrets, they could gain an edge, something that would allow them to not just survive Eztar, but to conquer it. The sight of the watch. She returned to camp that night with the metal in tow, showing it to the rest of the crew. They gathered around her, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "What is it?" Marcus Hale asked, his brow furrowed as he examined the strange substance. "Some kind of alien artifact?" "I think it's more than that," Lillian replied. "This metal, it's like it has its own energy, its own life force. If we can figure out how to harness it, we might be able to turn the tables on this planet." For the next several weeks, Lillian and her team worked tirelessly, experimenting with the metal, trying to unlock its secrets. They used all the knowledge they had accumulated over their years of training, applying the principles of engineering, biology, and physics. But the metal seemed to defy all logic, responding in ways they couldn't fully understand. It was almost as if it were alive, as though it had been waiting for them to find it, to awaken it from its slumber. He said, slowly, they began to make progress. They discovered that when exposed to the right frequencies of sound and heat, the metal would change its properties, becoming more malleable, more adaptable. It seemed to bond with other materials, enhancing their strength and durability. Over time, they were able to craft new weapons, armor, and tools from the glowing metal, each one more powerful than the last. But it was when they discovered that the metal could amplify their own physical abilities that they truly realized the potential of their find. Quote, "We found that the golden standard had already been discovered and was used for helping to alleviate the recurrent depressions." End quote. Lillian was the first to test the metal on herself. She had always been strong, had always pushed herself to the limits, but after incorporating the metal into her armor, she felt something different, something more. She could feel the metal humming beneath her skin, enhancing her strength, sharpening her senses. It was as though her body had been transformed, her every movement more fluid, more precise. Entire beings needed fuel these days, and there was no food on. She felt invincible. The rest of the crew followed suit, each one incorporating the metal into their gear, feeling the same surge of power. They were no longer just survivors. They were becoming something more. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't long before they began to realize the true extent of the planet's potential. Eztar was not just a place to survive. It was a breeding ground for innovation, for transformation. The metal, combined with their ingenuity and resilience, was allowing them to evolve in ways they had never imagined. The planet that had been designed to destroy them was instead shaping them into something greater. One day, while exploring a particularly treacherous section of the planet's landscape, they encountered another predator, one unlike anything they had seen before. It was a massive serpentine creature, its scales like jagged obsidian, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It was the apex predator of Eztar, the creature that ruled the mountains, the one that even the other beasts feared. The creature attacked without warning, its massive body coiling around them, its jaws snapping with deadly intent. But this time, things were different. Lillian and her crew had the advantage. They had the mettle. They had the strength. They fought back, using their newfound abilities and the weapons they had crafted from the glowing metal. The battle was fierce, but they emerged victorious. The creature lay defeated at their feet, its massive body twitching as it expired. They had slain the beast that had once been the ultimate threat on Eztar. And in that moment, as they stood over their fallen enemy, they realized something profound. They had not just survived. They had become a force to be reckoned with. The Deathworld had tried to kill them, had tried to break them, but in the end, it had only forged them into something more powerful than they had ever been. Eztar was no longer a place of exile. It was their home, and they were no longer just humans. They were a superpower in the making. And the Nyirzi, who had thought they could destroy humanity, would soon realize that they had made a terrible mistake. Months had passed since Lillian Core and her crew had begun their adaptation to the hostile world of Eztar. What had once been a death sentence, a brutal exile to a planet known for its complete lack of mercy, had slowly transformed into something much more. Humanity, pushed to the brink, had managed to do what the Nyirzi had never anticipated. They had not just survived, but thrived. Lillian had once believed that the universe would break them, just as it had broken so many others before. But here, on Eztar, amidst the perilous creatures and the unforgiving landscapes, they had found something deeper than survival: purpose. With each day they grew stronger, more resilient, more capable. What had been a fight for their lives was now becoming something far more significant: a battle for power, for dominion, and ultimately for the future of their species. The first hint that things were changing beyond the confines of their small camp came one evening when the atmosphere above Eztar began to shift. The once muted colors of the planet's sky, which had always hung in shades of sickly yellow and orange, began to darken, coiling in unpredictable swirls as though the planet itself was alive, struggling against an unseen force. The wind, once a steady howl, turned into a violent gust, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. The air crackled with electricity, and for the first time in months, Lillian felt a strange sense of unease, a reminder that despite their growing power, they were still nothing more than ants on an unforgiving world. Lillian stood at the edge of their camp, staring up at the sky. Her body, encased in armor laced with the glowing metal they had discovered, felt invulnerable, but even she could not ignore the uneasy weight in the air. Something had changed. "Captain?" Marcus Hale's voice broke her from her thoughts. He had joined her without her realizing, his tall form looming beside her, his face etched with concern. "What's happening?" Lillian turned to face him, her brow furrowed. "I don't know, Marcus, but I can feel it. Something's coming." He nodded, glancing at the sky. "Do you think it's the Nyirzi? Have they finally realized what we've become?" The thought of the Nyirzi, the beings who had cast them away, still sent a surge of anger through Lillian's veins. The aliens believed they could control the universe, that they were the arbiters of peace and order. They thought they could extinguish humanity with a single brutal exile. But they had underestimated them. They had underestimated Lillian Core and her crew. And now humanity had become something more than they could ever imagine. "I don't think this is their doing," Lillian said slowly. "The Nyirzi are powerful, but they're not gods. This is something different." Marcus nodded grimly, as if sensing the same eerie change that had taken root in the air. It was then that the ground trembled beneath them, a low rumbling that grew louder with each passing second. Lillian's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her weapon, but before she could speak, a massive roar split the air, a sound so deafening that it vibrated in her bones. "Get ready!" Lillian shouted, turning to the rest of the crew. "Arm yourselves! It's coming!" The roar came again, this time closer. Lillian's pulse quickened as she scanned the horizon, her senses heightened by the energy of the metal coursing through her body. They had faced down countless creatures on Eztar, from the massive reptilian beasts to the swarming insectoids that had attacked them early on. But none of them had ever sounded like this. This was something else, something bigger. The roar came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of massive footsteps, each one shaking the ground beneath them. "They're here," Lillian muttered. Within moments, the source of the noise became visible, an enormous creature emerging from the forest at the edge of their camp. It was a massive serpentine behemoth, its scales black as night and glistening with an unnatural sheen. The creature's head was as large as a small building, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. As it slithered toward them, its body moving in smooth, predatory waves, the very earth seemed to buckle beneath its immense weight. "Yes. This can't be real," Marcus whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. I knew from experience that whatever I felt was absolutely inaccurate. But it was real, and it was coming straight for them. "Form a perimeter," Lillian barked. "Get to the high ground. Prepare for battle." Her crew moved quickly, taking up defensive positions. They had faced predators before, but nothing like this. They could feel the raw power emanating from the creature, and Lillian knew that this would be their toughest fight yet. The creature reared up, towering over them, its maw opening wide. The stench of death filled the air as it hissed, a sound like the screech of metal grinding against stone. Its massive tail lashed out, sweeping through the trees and sending them flying through the air. Lillian's heart raced, but her mind remained focused. She raised her weapon, one crafted from the glowing metal, and fired. The beam struck the creature, but it barely flinched. The scales were too thick, too resistant. "We need to hit it somewhere weak," Lillian shouted. "Focus fire on the underbelly." The crew fired in unison, their weapons charging with the energy they had learned to harness from the metal. The creature's body twisted and writhed as they struck it again and again, but still it came. It was like fighting a force of nature, an unstoppable avalanche of death. Then, just as the creature seemed about to crush them under its weight, a new sound pierced the air, a sound unlike any they had ever heard. It was the sound of a roar, but it was not from the creature before them. It was from another creature, one far larger, far more terrifying. Lillian's eyes widened in shock as another massive beast emerged from the forest, a towering titan even greater than the one they had been fighting. Its scales were a pale, sickly green, its eyes gleaming with an intelligent malice. It moved with incredible speed, its body a blur of muscle and bone as it lunged at the first creature, its jaws snapping shut on its neck with a sickening crunch. The two beasts collided in an earth-shattering clash, a whirlwind of teeth and claws as they fought for dominance. The crew could only watch in awe as the battle unfolded before them. Do we fight?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "No," Lillian said, her voice tight with urgency. "We wait. We observe. Let them fight." It was clear to her now that the creatures weren't just mindless beasts. They were fighting for territory, for dominance. Eztar was not simply a world of random chaos. It had its own brutal order, and that order was now fighting itself. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the two creatures tearing at each other with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Finally, with a final massive roar, the larger beast sank its teeth into the neck of the first creature, dragging it to the ground. There was a moment of stillness, And then the beast stood over its fallen foe, triumphant. Lillian's team stood motionless, still processing what they had just witnessed. Their focus had shifted from survival to sheer amazement. The sheer power of these creatures, the primal struggle for dominance. It was something they could never have anticipated. Then, as if sensing the presence of the humans, the larger beast turned its glowing eyes toward them, its massive form silhouetted against the darkened sky. For a long moment, there was silence. The creature regarded them with what almost seemed like recognition, its eyes narrowing as it assessed them. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature turned and slithered back into the depths of the forest, disappearing as if it had never been there. "What just happened?" Marcus asked, still staring into the darkness. Lillian didn't have an answer. She was just as shocked as he was. All she knew was that the world of Eztar had just shifted again. The battle for survival was no longer just about them fighting the planet's monsters. The balance of power had changed. "I think we've just witnessed something far more important than a fight for territory," Lillian said quietly, her voice filled with awe. "The creatures here, they're evolving. This planet is a breeding ground for power, for something much greater than we ever realized. And I think we've just been dragged into something much bigger than ourselves." She paused, staring into the depths of the jungle where the massive beast had disappeared. "We need to learn from this," Lillian continued. "We need to understand this world. If we can unlock its secrets, if we can harness its power, we'll be more than just survivors. We'll become something unstoppable." The crew nodded, their expressions filled with a new understanding. They had come to Eztar expecting death. Instead, they had found life. A brutal, savage life, but life nonetheless. A life that would shape them into something far more dangerous than the Nyirzi or any other force in the galaxy could ever anticipate. As Lillian looked out into the darkened horizon, a new thought began to form in her mind, one that filled her with both hope and dread. The Nyirzi had cast them away, thinking they would perish on this Deathworld, but they hadn't anticipated this, that humanity, like the creatures of this planet, would evolve into something more, something stronger, something unstoppable. The future of humanity was no longer in their hands. It was in Eztar's, and they were just beginning to realize what that really meant.